The desert woke before the sun. The wind was already moving, not soft, not kind, but restless, stirring fine dust into a low whisper that rolled across the dunes. It carried no scent, no promise of change, only the dry breath of a world that had forgotten what rain felt like. From a ridge of rock, a jackal stood and watched the horizon pale. His fur was rough with sand, his ribs showing through the thin stretch of his sides. He had not eaten in 2 days, not truly. The night had given him nothing but silence, and even that felt thinner now. He lifted his head and called. It was not a warning, not a cry for others. There were no others anymore, but a sound made for the sake of remembering he could. A long, low note that cracked halfway through and dissolved into the rising wind. The desert listened. Then, it gave him back nothing. The jackal stood for a while longer, his breath slow, his eyes narrowed against the coming light. The horizon trembled, not from movement, but from heat, the early shimmer of a sun not yet visible but already ruling. He turned and began to walk. The sand burned earlier now. Even the shadows seemed tired, shrinking before the day had properly begun. His paws left no trace behind him. The wind erased each print before he'd taken the next step. It was as if the world refused to admit he had passed through it. Ahead, the shape of an old road cut faintly through the dunes, a scar left by men long gone. He followed it, out of habit more than hope. Once, it had led to a place where water pooled for a few short weeks each year. Now it led nowhere, and he knew it. Still, he followed. A scrap of movement caught his eye, something pale near a dried bush. He stopped. A lizard, thin as a stick, lay half buried in sand, still alive but barely. The jackal approached, lowered his head and sniffed. The creature twitched, weakly. He opened his mouth and ended its suffering with one quick bite. It was not enough, but it was something. The sun broke the horizon then, not rising but arriving, harsh and full, flooding the world in blinding gold. The heat hit like a blow. The air itself seemed to shudder. The jackal climbed a dune and stopped at its crest, looking out over miles of sand, a rippling sea of light. There were no clouds, no wind now, no movement. Only heat. He opened his mouth again and called, louder this time. The sound rolled across the desert, lonely, defiant, unanswered. He listened for a reply. Nothing came back but silence and the growing hum of the day. The jackal stood still, his silhouette carved against the white sun. Then quietly he began to walk again, not because he hoped to find something, but because stillness was death here, and motion was the only truth left. Behind him his footprints vanished. The desert exhaled, and the heat answered in place of a voice. By midday the sky had become a sheet of white. No clouds, no edges. Only the sun, hanging heavy and merciless, flattening every shadow until the world looked carved from glass. The jackal moved slowly now. His tongue hung out, dry and swollen. His breath came in short bursts, hot enough to sting his throat. Each step sank deeper into the sand than the one before, as though the desert itself was trying to pull him down, to keep him. He followed no scent, no sound. The air was too hot for either to live in. But somewhere inside him, beneath hunger, beneath exhaustion, there was memory. A memory of a place where the sand dipped low and white bones lay half buried, cool under the surface. He found it by instinct, not by sight. A shallow basin stretched ahead, the color of old ivory. The wind had shaped it into a hollow that caught what little shade there was. The jackal descended, paws sliding, sand spilling under his claws. At the bottom lay the remains of something large, the skeleton of a camel, sun-bleached and almost beautiful. Its skull was tilted toward the sky, as if even in death it had been looking for mercy. The ribs cast faint shadows across the ground, long and thin, like the bars of a forgotten cage. The jackal approached. He sniffed the air, circling the bones once. They smelled of nothing. Too old for decay, too clean for life. But beneath them, faint and strange, came another scent. Moisture. Not water, not enough to drink, but the ghost of it. He began to dig. The sand gave way easily, the top layers dry and hot, the deeper ones cooler, heavier. He worked until his paws ached, until his claws scraped against something hard. When he pulled it free, it wasn't stone. It was metal, smooth, rusted, and small enough to fit in a man's hand. He sniffed it, confused. The scent was old, sharp, unfamiliar. The desert had no smell like that. The wind shifted. From somewhere beyond the ridge came a sound. Faint, distant, but wrong. A low hum, almost mechanical, carried on the air for a moment before fading. The jackal lifted his head sharply. His ears flicked toward the horizon, eyes narrowing. He waited. Nothing. Only the soft hiss of the wind resettling the sand. He looked back at the object he'd unearthed, the piece of metal half buried again by the shifting dust. His reflection flickered faintly on its surface, distorted by rust. For a heartbeat, it looked like another jackal watching him from inside it. He turned away. Climbing out of the basin was harder than coming down. The sand slid beneath him, filling the hollow behind his steps as fast as he made them. When he reached the top, he paused and looked back once. The bones below gleamed faintly, bright against the red light of the lowering sun. The desert wind picked up again, stronger now, sweeping across the dunes. The skeleton began to vanish beneath it, rib by rib, skull last, until it was gone, as though it had never been there. The jackal stood watching until the wind died. The sand was smooth again, perfect, unbroken. He turned toward the west, where the sun had begun to sink into the endless dunes. The air glowed copper and blood red. Far ahead, the horizon shimmered, and for the briefest moment, he thought he saw movement there. Not animal, not wind. Something else. He blinked, and it was gone. The jackal lowered his head and kept walking. Behind him, the desert settled, pretending once more to be asleep. But beneath its calm surface, something had begun to stir. Something that remembered the weight of bones, the taste of rust, and the sound of voices long buried. The sun sank slow, heavy, and red behind the dunes, as if reluctant to leave a world still burning. The air cooled only slightly, just enough for the jackal's breath to sound again. The wind had quieted, but the silence that followed was not peace. It was waiting. He walked until the stars began to appear, weak at first, then bright, sharp, like old eyes watching from far away. The sand beneath his paws was smoother here, too smooth. It no longer shifted naturally. It had been shaped by something else once, long ago. Then his paw struck something hard. He stopped, ears twitching. The sand glittered faintly around a pale edge of metal. He dug quickly, his movements urgent, almost desperate, as if he knew that under the desert's skin lay something it wanted him not to find. The sand gave way to reveal a flat surface, dull, gray, and cold. It stretched wider than he could see in the faint starlight, buried deep except for this corner. He stepped onto it cautiously, claws scraping the metal. The sound echoed, not just against the surface, but downward, hollow. There was something beneath. The jackal lowered his head, sniffing. The scent here was wrong, not of life, not of death, but of dust trapped too long. A man-made scent, old but unforgotten. He paced back and forth, his tail low, his reflection moving faintly on the metal in flashes of moonlight. Then, faintly from beneath him, a sound. A soft hum, weak, fading, almost like a heartbeat under the sand. He froze, muscles rigid. The hum came again, longer this time, pulsing with a rhythm that didn't belong to wind or earth. It grew, deep and mechanical, as though the desert itself were exhaling after centuries of holding its breath. The jackal backed away, eyes wide, teeth bared slightly. He had heard the sounds of men before, engines, rifles, fires, but this was older, slower, a memory of noise. He tilted his head, listening. The hum grew faint again, sinking beneath the sand until only silence remained. He waited. Nothing. Then, from somewhere far to the east, a second sound. A low thud, followed by a sighing vibration that trembled through the ground. The dunes shivered, shedding fine dust that drifted across his paws. The jackal stepped off the metal, turning toward the sound. His instincts screamed to run, but something deeper held him. Curiosity, or maybe recognition. The desert wasn't supposed to speak. But it was. He climbed the nearest dune, sand sliding beneath his claws. At the top, he stopped and stared. The horizon glowed faintly, not from the moon, not from fire, but from beneath the ground. A dull orange light, flickering and uneven, pulsing in strange rhythm, like veins under thin skin. The jackal lowered his body, crouching low, watching. The glow spread for a few moments, then faded again, swallowed by darkness. The wind returned, weak but deliberate, as if to erase what he had seen. It brushed against his fur, warm and dry, whispering through his ears, like words too faint to understand. The jackal blinked and turned his head slightly as though listening to something close. And then, just before the silence reclaimed everything, a sound reached him. Faint, buried, human. A voice. It came from beneath the sand. A single word, warped by time and distance, impossible to decipher, but unmistakably alive. The jackal's ears flicked forward. He stepped closer to the dune's edge, peering down into the endless dark. The voice did not come again, but the echo of it lingered in the still air, an impossible sound in a place that had forgotten sound itself. He stood there for a long time, the desert sprawling silent and infinite around him. Then, slowly, he began to descend toward the glow that had vanished, drawn by something he didn't understand, something ancient, buried, and waiting to be found. The desert had finally answered his call, not with life, not with death, but with memory. By dawn, the horizon had turned pale again, not bright, not golden, but the color of bone beneath thin skin. The wind carried a strange heaviness now, thick with dust that didn't belong to the dunes. The jackal moved through it carefully, his paws silent on the cooling sand. He followed the memory of the light. The dunes sloped downward, forming a shallow basin that seemed wrong, too even, too shaped. The deeper he went, the colder the air became, as if the desert itself were holding its breath. Then, the sand broke away beneath his paw. He slipped forward, sliding down a short incline before landing on something that wasn't earth. He stood quickly, alert, and found himself surrounded by gray, not stone, but something smoother, stranger. Walls. Half buried in dunes, cracked but still standing. He had found a place where the desert had swallowed the past and failed to finish the meal. The jackal walked slowly through the ruins. Metal bones jutted from the sand, bent and twisted by heat. There were shapes that might once have been doors, hollow frames where wind now whistled through. The smell was old, iron, rust, and something faintly sweet, like decay trapped too long. He passed what had been a window. Its glass had melted, flowed downward, frozen again in ripples like water turned to stone. Through it, the faint light of morning caught on something deeper. A reflection, a gleam. He jumped lightly through the opening and landed inside what might once have been a room. The floor was uneven, half buried. Wires hung from the ceiling like vines. A metal box lay broken in the corner, its insides scattered. Small gears, pieces of glass, coils of copper. He sniffed them cautiously. The air was different here, heavier, sour with forgotten electricity. He padded deeper, ears twitching. The silence pressed close, thick and absolute. Even the wind didn't enter here. The world outside had its breath back, but this place still held its last gasp. Then, a sound. A faint crackle. The jackal froze. His ears turned toward a shape on the wall. A black rectangular panel, half covered in dust. From behind it came the noise, soft, irregular, the faint pulse of something not yet dead. He approached slowly, nose low, tail stiff. The sound shifted. A burst, then a hiss, then a whisper too faint to understand. The jackal lifted his head, eyes fixed on the panel. He didn't know what he was hearing, but it made the fur along his spine stand on end. The noise was old, distorted, but human. A fragment of a voice. "You hear? Not alone?" Then silence. He stepped back, growling low, not in threat but confusion. The panel flickered faintly, once, twice, and went dark again. The jackal stood there for a long time, staring at it. Then he turned away, climbed out through the broken window, and emerged into the open air again. The sun was rising over the dunes, casting long shadows across the ruins. From above, the city looked like a wound, a cluster of shapes half buried, half forgotten, too stubborn to disappear completely. The jackal stood at its edge, the wind whipping dust through his fur. He could see where the sand had begun to fill everything again, covering the streets, smothering the remnants, slowly erasing memory. But he had heard it, a voice, a human echo buried in silence. He tilted his head, gazing out over the empty expanse. The desert stretched endlessly, glowing faintly gold now in the heat. It seemed peaceful again. But beneath that calm, he knew something was still moving, something that remembered the sound of men and machines, and the day when the desert had decided to take it all back. He sat for a long time, the wind combing through his fur,